The sun sat like a brand on her skin, heat shimmering in waves that turned the desert into a sea of fire. And with every faltering step her white wedding dress dragged heavy with dust, shredded lace clinging like the memory of vows already betrayed. She had been driven into exile, left to wander alone in a land that swallows footprints before they're even made, her throat cracked with thirst, her heart breaking under the weight of promises that were never meant to be kept. She prayed for mercy, yet heard only silence until a voice pierced the wind, fragile and trembling, a child's voice asking, "Did God send you to us?" And in that moment, she froze between despair and destiny, torn between walking away or stepping toward a people she had never known. Now ask yourself, if you were that bride, abandoned in a burning desert with nothing but betrayal at your back and an unseen future ahead, would you keep walking? Or would you answer that child's call, not knowing if it leads to salvation or ruin? Before we begin, subscribe to this channel. The sun sat like a brand on her skin, the air shimmering with waves of heat that danced like mirages across the dunes. And she stumbled forward, her gown already torn and stained by grit, each footfall sinking into the hot, coarse sand as if the earth itself sought to swallow her whole. The bride, young, trembling, her throat raw with thirst, pressed her hand to her parched lips, daring a moment to breathe, and in that desperate inhale tasted only dust and salt. Her eyes burned not merely from the sunlight's cruelty, but from grief, from the sharp ache of betrayal and loss that accompanied every step she took deeper into this vast wasteland. She had been driven here, sent from a life she scarcely recognized, with a vow tied to her heart like a noose. Yet now the promise felt hollow in the searing wind. She remembered, in flashes, the hush of the chapel where vows were whispered, the face of the man she believed would protect her, the bright eyes of her mother warning her, "Trust, but remember your strength." Yet all that sanctuary was gone now, replaced by an unending horizon of orange dunes and a scorching sky that felt like the breath of an angry god. No shade, no water, no familiar landmark, only the ceaseless glare overhead and the shifting sand that swallowed her footprints the moment she stepped. The wedding dress she wore, once crisp white and full of hope, clung damp with sweat and shredded lace, its purity now tarnished by dust and fear. She wondered if she was alive or drifting between life and delirium, for her legs faltered, her vision shimmered, and every nerve in her body screamed. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her home, her family's embrace, the scent of wild jasmine in their courtyard. But when she reopened them, she saw only an infinite sea of dunes extending to an invisible rim, and felt again the weight of how alone she was. She muttered a prayer, though uncertain whom she addressed, whether God or the wind, begging that anyone hear her. And then she heard a distant cry, fragile as a bird's tremble, carried faintly on the wind, a child's voice, uncertain, questioning, "Did God send you to us?" Her heart jolted, hope and dread colliding. She paused, every muscle trembling, listening. The voice came again, softer now, hesitant but persistent. That single question, a simple utterance, felt like an accusation and a welcome both. "Did God send me?" she thought, startled, her mind spinning. In that moment, every memory, every sorrow and regret she carried, pressed upon her, a burden too heavy to bear in this emptiness. She forced herself to steady, swallowing a sob, looking across the dunes for its source, but saw nothing but sunlit ripples and dunes stacked like waves. The voice might have been phantom, born of thirst, yet she could not dismiss it. So she pressed on, drawn toward the sound as though it held the only lifeline she had. As she walked, the heat seemed to rise in waves, pressing down on her, as if the sky itself conspired to suffocate her. Her throat cracked with dryness. Her legs shook. Every sand blade beneath her sandals cut like shards, every wind gust stung like lashes. She thought of turning back, of admitting defeat, but to where would she go? She had no map, no escort, no allies. Only that question haunted her. Did God send you to us?" She carried with her a sealed letter, hidden beneath her dress, a commission she could barely comprehend in her moments of weakness, but felt its weight as surely as the sun weighed overhead. She had been told that her arrival here would fulfill a promise, but now she wondered if she was fulfilling someone else's agenda or stepping into a trap. Yet even as doubt pressed at her heart, she felt the pull of the child's voice, soft as wind among the dunes. She forced herself to focus. She would survive. Not for the sake of her mission, but because she still had breath. As she staggered on, her mind replayed every scrap of wisdom her mother gave her. When all seems lost, leave a trace of kindness. Leave a thread of mercy. And so she called out, her voice cracking, I am here because I was sent, though she did not know by whom." The wind swallowed her words, but she heard the echo in her bones as she continued across the burning sea of sand. Following that child's call, each agonizing step forging the first line in a story of suffering and hope, betrayal and truth, the desert wind did not forgive its voice, a constant whisper against her ears, stirring memories she had buried beneath layers of silence and grit. And as the bride pressed forward, her legs wobbling with every step, the weight of her past rose to meet her like a ghost beside her shadow, demanding to be seen, to be felt, to be mourned. She remembered the smell first, strange how scent outlived everything, else the jasmine that clung to her veil the morning of her wedding. Petals her mother had gathered by lantern light from the far corner of the courtyard. A ritual carried forward by women who had never once escaped sorrow but still dared to believe in beauty. She had stood there barefoot, the hem of her dress kissed by the edge of the dawn, staring into a mirror that showed a girl full of hope but haunted by duty. Her name Anaiah whispered back to her through the heat, not from the dunes, but from memory, as if the wind had stolen it to remind her that she was once more than a body wandering the wasteland. Anaiah, the promised one. Anaiah, the daughter of two worlds. Anaiah, the girl who believed that a wedding could rewrite the sins of generations. Yet that morning, behind her smile, her fingers trembled. Because the man she had agreed to marry was not the one she loved, nor even one she trusted. He had been chosen for her by elders, by a contract sealed in silence, between families long divided by bitterness and land and ancient debts. He was older not in years, but in spirit, weathered, cold-eyed, a man of prophet who saw her not as a bride, but as a bridge. He had spoken gently at first, cloaked in scriptures and promises, a silk tongue that convinced her father, but her mother's silence had said more than any words could. She had asked her mother once, on the night before the ceremony, whether love ever followed obedience, and her mother had simply stroked her hair and replied, "Sometimes, my child, love arrives through suffering, and sometimes it never arrives at all." That night Anaiah had cried, quietly, wrapped in a quilt stitched by her grandmother, each thread a prayer, each patch a story of a woman who endured. But what choice did she have? Her family was struggling, half their land taken by creditors, her younger brother sick with a fever no doctor could name, and her father growing frail from secrets he wouldn't share. And when the man Caleb came offering not just protection but healing, opportunity, and a future for the children not yet born, her father wept and agreed, kissing her forehead like an apology. Anaiah had walked the aisle beneath a canvas sky. The community gathered like spectators in an old play, their faces unreadable. She wore white not because it meant purity, but because it was tradition, a symbol of surrender disguised as celebration. Her hands were cold in Caleb's, and when he said the words, "Till death do us part," she felt a shift in the air, like a door had closed somewhere deep inside her. The desert now felt like the echo of that door, hot, airless, vast. As she trudged forward, her thoughts fractured, memory and present colliding. She recalled the night after the wedding, the room filled with candles and silence, Caleb sitting at the edge of the bed, speaking to her in a tone soft but firm. "This marriage," he had said, "is more than you understand." It is not about us. It is about repairing what was broken long before we were born. You are a symbol, Anaiah. You carry more than just your name." She hadn't understood it then, but over the next few weeks, the veil lifted. Caleb was not just a man, he was an agent of something greater, an arm of a cause cloaked in justice but wielding power like a weapon. He spoke of peace but enforced it with cold strategy. He brought wealth to her family, but severed her from her voice. He took her away from her village under the guise of security and led her across states, into enclaves where plans were whispered behind locked doors. Her name, her story, became an instrument, and she was told she had a role to play, a place to arrive, a delivery to make. "There's a people waiting," Caleb had said, eyes alight not with kindness, but with command. "A people that have suffered long. And you are the bridge between us." She didn't understand, didn't ask, too frightened to challenge him, but as the journey grew longer, and the truth harder to ignore, she began to wonder if she was truly being sent to help, or merely to distract, to manipulate, to seal something that smelled more like conquest than compassion. And then, one night, as they camped on the edge of the desert, he had handed her a letter sealed in wax, addressed to someone she'd never met, and said only, "Deliver this, alone." No further explanation, no farewell. He turned and left her with a mule, a canteen, and a direction. That was 3 days ago. And now the canteen was dry, the mule had collapsed before the second sunset, and the letter pressed against her ribs like a stone. Her face cracked with sweat and grief, Anaiah trudged on, every footstep echoing the ache of choices not made freely. The wind mocked her. The silence accused her. And yet, strange and unbidden, she kept remembering the stories her mother used to tell when she was small. Stories of the land, of tribes who had lived long before borders and deeds, who spoke to rivers and read the sky like scripture. Her mother had known their songs, sung them in secret. And once, when Anaiah was just 7, she had asked where her grandmother's skin got its hue, why her cheekbones looked like no one else in the village. Her mother had paused, then smiled and said, "Because our story doesn't start here, Anaiah. It stretches west, beyond fences and flags." At the time, it meant nothing. Now it meant everything. The bride stumbled, her vision blurring, her knees sinking into hot sand, and for a moment she collapsed fully, breath shuddering, her fingers clawing into the dune, as if begging it to hold her. And in that moment, not of death but of surrender, her mind flooded with the image of her mother's face, the way her eyes glistened when no one was looking, the tremble in her lip the night she handed Anaiah a locket and whispered, "Whatever happens, remember, you carry more than just your name. You carry our silence." The memory hit like a wave. Anaiah wept not loud, but deep, the kind of cry that has no sound, only tremors. For all she had lost. For the childhood she never truly owned. For the mother she left without goodbye. For the truth she sensed but had never been brave enough to ask. She wanted to go back, but there was no back. Only forward. And somewhere ahead, perhaps waiting, perhaps watching, was the child's voice that asked, "Did God send you to us?" Anaiah didn't have an answer yet. But as she rose, dirt clinging to her skin, she felt something shift not in the wind, but in her bones. A determination forged not from duty, but from the thin thread of truth that had survived every lie she'd been told. She didn't know what she'd find beyond the next ridge, whether a people waited, whether forgiveness waited, whether she was messenger or martyr. But she would keep walking. Not because of Caleb, not because of the letter, but because something deep within her had begun to awaken the part that belonged to the soil, to stories whispered over fire, to mothers who wept in silence and daughters who rose anyway. And if she was to walk into a reckoning, she would do so not as a bride cast out, but as a woman returning to something older than names, older than pain. Her journey had just begun. Anaiah didn't know how long she had been walking, When she first saw it, a flicker in the corner of her eye. No more than a silhouette, darting between the dunes like a memory refusing to be forgotten, but it was enough to send a chill through her sunburnt spine. Not from fear, but from the impossible weight of hope. Because up until now, the desert had been a graveyard of silence, and any movement meant life. She blinked once, twice to clear her vision, the sun blinding at the edges, and leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat as she scanned the vast golden plain before her. The dunes rolled like the backs of sleeping beasts, the heat bending the air into ghost-like waves. But there, just beyond a slanted ridge, she saw it again, the unmistakable shape of someone watching. Her instinct urged caution, a deep instinct, the kind passed down through women who had learned the hard way that even kindness could wear a predator's face. But something in her stirred an ache, a pull, maybe even that lingering echo of the child's voice, and so, with her heart rattling against her ribs, she took a slow, careful step forward. The sand hissed beneath her foot. Then another step. Still, no movement from the figure. Anaiah lifted her hand, shielding her eyes from the glare. And that's when she saw it clearly, a child. No older than 8, standing barefoot in the sand. Her dark hair braided tight, her dress thin and worn. A splash of red beading across her collarbone, like a necklace made from berries or coral. The child did not run, did not speak, only watched. Her expression unreadable, neither afraid nor welcoming. Just present. Anaiah hesitated. She had no food to offer, no water, no protection. Only her trembling limbs and a half-remembered promise tucked in the hollow of her chest. Still, she opened her mouth and spoke, her voice dry and cracked. "Who are you?" But the child did not answer. Instead, she turned slowly, deliberately, and began walking up the dune, her feet leaving faint impressions in the sand. And Anaiah followed, not because she knew where she was going, but because something deep in her gut told her this was the direction fate had chosen. As they moved, the wind picked up, brushing past them like a warning, carrying the scent of juniper and smoke, as if someone nearby had lit a fire long before dawn. Anaiah's legs ached with every step, her calves burning, but the child kept a steady pace, neither rushing nor waiting. She wanted to call out again, but her throat was too raw. And still, no words came from the girl. Just silence and the soft rustle of sand under small feet. Finally, they crested a ridge, and Anaiah gasped not at the view, but at the shift in the air. Below them lay a small valley, sunken between dunes like a forgotten cradle. There, nestled among low shrubs and sun-bleached rock, was a circle of stones, arranged carefully, deliberately too symmetrical to be natural. At the center stood a weathered pole, wrapped with faded cloth, feathers fluttering from its top. A makeshift marker. A shrine, maybe. Or a grave. The child walked to it and knelt, her fingers brushing the base of the pole. Then looked back at Anaiah with eyes the color of storm clouds and said, "My brother died here." The words hit Anaiah like a slap, not just the sorrow in them, but the clarity, the sudden shattering of silence. She took a few tentative steps forward, her breath hitching. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The child nodded but said nothing more. The stillness returned, thick and heavy, settling like dust on their shoulders. Then the child rose and looked directly at her again and asked, "Did God send you to us?" It wasn't the first time Anaiah had heard the question, but now it felt heavier, as though the desert itself waited for her answer. She wanted to say yes, but the truth was, she didn't know. She didn't even know who us meant. Instead, she replied carefully, "I was sent, but I don't know if it was by God." The child tilted her head, not confused, not judging, just absorbing. "You came from the east," she said, as though stating a fact. Anaiah nodded. "I did. There are others," the girl said, "men in boots, who came from that way. But they didn't stay. They left smoke behind." Anaiah felt her stomach knot. When? She asked. The child shrugged. Some moons ago. They asked for water. My uncle gave them. Then they broke the well. The statement was simple, but its implications slammed into Anaiah like a wave. She had seen Caleb's men do things like that, arrive with smiles, promises, then take more than they gave. She felt a pang of shame, of complicity. The child moved to sit on a rock, pulling her knees to her chest. Mama says not to speak to outsiders. But you wear white. That means sorrow, not danger. Anaiah looked down at her dress, torn, filthy, no longer the symbol of purity it once was. And yet, somehow, this child still saw it as sacred. What's your name? Anaiah asked. The girl hesitated, then replied, Tiva. A name like wind, like breath. And where is your mama? Further in, Tiva said, pointing toward a canyon etched into the western wall of the valley. With the others. We move often now. The land isn't safe. Anaiah looked at the canyon. Something in her stirred like memory, like recognition. Tiva stood again. You should come. Mama says no one comes here unless they're meant to. Anaiah hesitated, her pulse pounding. Her mission. The letter. The fact that she was told to deliver it alone. And yet here she was, being pulled deeper into a place she hadn't even known existed. She looked at Tiva, at the solemn way she carried her grief like an old woman, and nodded. Lead the way. They descended into the valley, the heat still oppressive, but somehow softened by the presence of another human being. Anaiah's steps grew steadier, guided not by certainty, but by instinct. As they walked, Tiva spoke in bits and pieces about the place she called home, about a grandmother who read the stars, about a song they weren't allowed to sing anymore because it brought trouble. The white men say it's dangerous, Tiva said. But it's not. It's just old. Anaiah listened, her heart aching with every word. She had spent years trying to please people who wore their cruelty in law books and ceremony. But here, in the desert, was a child speaking truths no one wanted to hear. They reached a shaded alcove, where rock walls curved inward like arms around a secret. Tiva whistled softly, and a moment later, two women emerged tall, weathered, eyes sharp with mistrust. One held a walking stick, the other a bundle of herbs. They did not smile. Who is she? The older one asked. Tiva looked at Anaiah. She's in white. She was sent. Anaiah stepped forward, bowing her head slightly. My name is Anaiah. I mean no harm. The older woman studied her. Everyone means no harm until they do. I understand, Anaiah said. You don't know me. I don't even know what I'm doing here. But I swear, I won't take what isn't mine. The women exchanged glances. The one with the herbs nodded. Then you may stay the night. But in the morning, we'll decide. And just like that, Anaiah was led into the canyon, into a world hidden from the map she once knew, into a people who had learned how to survive by vanishing. That night, as she lay on a bed of woven reeds beneath a ceiling of stone, listening to the soft breathing of Tiva beside her, Anaiah held the sealed letter against her chest and wondered for the first time not what was in it, but who she had become by carrying it. The girl's question echoed in her. Did God send you to us? And though the stars blinked with silence, she felt faintly, as though something in her past, something buried deep, was finally beginning to answer. Anaiah awoke to the smell of wood smoke and something warm in the air like corn or beans slow cooked in clay, and for a moment, before her eyes opened, she let herself believe she had been carried back to her mother's kitchen. Back to childhood where the ground was cool and the voices outside were familiar, where the sharp edges of the world had not yet carved themselves into her. But when she sat up, heart heavy with the weight of that illusion, she found herself still inside the stone alcove. Its ceiling cracked and worn like the palm of an old hand, and beside her, Tiva slept soundly. one arm over her stomach, her braids loosened in the night. The air was thinner this morning, but not cooler. The desert's heat never really slept. It only paused, and even the shadows of the canyon seemed bleached. Tired of holding the secrets of so many feet passing silently through its curves. Outside, the women who had offered her shelter moved quietly, speaking only when needed, grinding grain, tending a small fire, boiling water fetched from a spring Anaiah had not yet seen. No one smiled at her. No one asked her name again. And yet, she was not unwelcome. She moved slowly, still sore from her journey, and helped where she could, gathering dry branches, washing a pot, holding a crying child so a mother could stir a kettle. But all the while, her mind raced, her hands shaking slightly whenever she brushed against the edge of the letter tucked inside her dress. She hadn't looked at it. Not once, hadn't dared. The seal was unbroken, the weight of it pressing against her chest like a second heartbeat, and yet she could feel its contents reaching through her skin like ice. That afternoon, Tiva led her through the narrow bend of the canyon, past ridges painted with red ochre and spiraled petroglyphs older than the country Anaiah once called home. They say the ancestors speak here, Tiva said, running her fingers over a symbol shaped like a bird in flight. But only if you listen the right way. Anaiah asked, "What's the right way?" Tiva shrugged, picking up a pebble. Without words, they climbed higher until the wind returned, and Anaiah felt it sharp and dry, brushing against her arms like a warning. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, trying to understand how these people, this child, survived in such silence, in such remoteness. "Since before I was born," Tiva said. "We move when we need to. Sometimes the land tells us it's time. And the others? The men?" Anaiah asked carefully. Tiva looked at her with eyes too wise for her age. "Gone, some taken. Some never returned. Mama says not all war looks like guns." Anaiah felt her throat tighten. "Do you remember your brother?" she asked. Tiva didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched and drew a shape in the sand, a crooked star, with a line through it. "He was like me," she said finally, "but louder. He laughed a lot. He liked to chase rabbits. He asked too many questions. What happened to him?" Anaiah whispered. Tiva brushed the sand smooth with her hand, erasing the star. The men came. One of them wore a cross. He smiled too much. Anaiah's stomach twisted. Caleb's men often did that, wore symbols of salvation on their chest while holding ruin behind their backs. "Did your mother ever talk to him?" Anaiah asked. "Only once," Tiva said. She told him, "You have no right to our memory." The words landed heavy in Anaiah's ears. She sat down beside Tiva, overwhelmed by the aching distance between what she had been told and what she was seeing. The people here were not enemies, not obstacles. They were the forgotten, the displaced, the ones who had learned to survive by vanishing. That night, around a small fire, Anaiah was offered food again, simple, nourishing: beans, squash, and something bitter brewed from desert leaves. The elders sat quietly, their faces drawn with suspicion, but not cruelty. "You carry something," one said, voice low and gravelly. "We can feel it." Anaiah looked down at her lap, then nodded. "A letter. From someone who said it needed to be delivered here." "Here?" the elder repeated. "To whom?" "I don't know," Anaiah admitted. "I wasn't told." A long silence followed. "Then why did you agree?" another asked. Anaiah looked into the fire. "Because I thought it would give my family peace. A future. Because I didn't know what I was agreeing to. Because I didn't ask." The elders said nothing. The flames crackled between them. "And now?" the first elder asked. "Now," Anaiah said slowly, "I wonder if I'm being used. If I'm part of something cruel." A soft rustle came from her left. Tiva had arrived, silent as ever, and sat beside her. The girl took her hand, lacing their fingers. "You're not cruel," she said. "Your hands are soft." The next day, Anaiah awoke to shouting. Not angry but urgent. She rushed outside to find the small community gathered near the southern wall of the canyon. Smoke rose in the distance, thin, black, unnatural. A scout returned breathless, speaking in a tongue Anaiah didn't fully understand. But the faces told her enough. Someone was coming. Someone unwelcome. The elders met quickly. Decisions were made without panic. Some families packed. Others hid. Tiva was pulled aside by her mother, told to stay close, not speak. Anaiah watched it all and felt the old fear return, the kind she felt the night Caleb told her she'd be sent alone, the kind that told her she was a tool in someone else's game. She retreated into the alcove and pulled the letter from her dress. Her hands trembled as she stared at the seal. She thought of her mother, of the quilt, of her father's tired eyes. Then, with a deep breath, she broke the seal. Inside, the handwriting was Caleb's, precise, cold. The letter spoke not of peace, not of healing, but of acquisition. It outlined terms, demands. The land beneath the southern ridge, it read, is to be surrendered. The water rights relinquished. The woman delivering this letter is not to be harmed. She's under protection. Her hands shook. She felt sick. It was never about her being the messenger. She was a shield. A symbol sent ahead to soften resistance. Her heart cracked wide open. She ran to Tiva, grabbed her by the shoulders. "Tiva, I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know what was in the letter." The girl looked at her, not afraid, not angry, just quietly, deeply hurt. "Then why didn't you ask?" Anaiah knelt, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because I was a coward. Because I thought obedience would save my family." Tiva looked down, then said, "But it hurt mine." The weight of that sentence buried Anaiah. The fire inside her ignited not anger at Caleb, but shame at herself, at her silence. She rose, the letter still in her hand, and walked back to the fire. Without a word, she threw it in, watched it burn. The elders watched, said nothing. But something shifted. That night, the stars felt colder, the wind harsher, and Anaiah understood that the real question wasn't whether she was sent. It was whether she would stay and what she would become. Anaiah could not sleep that night. The canyon walls pressed inward like ribs around a heart, and each gust of desert wind slipped through the cracks with a voice that sounded like judgment, like her mother whispering truths she had never dared to speak aloud. And she lay awake, staring at the rough ceiling of rock, the burnt smell of the letter still clinging to her fingers like smoke. She had destroyed the only proof of what she had carried, but not the truth of it. And that truth coiled inside her like a serpent, hissing, moving, demanding. When at last she sat up, the camp was quiet except for the low crackle of dying embers. Tiva slept curled against her mother, who had come to fetch her earlier in the evening, her arm draped protectively over the child's small body. Anaiah rose on unsteady feet and walked toward the edge of the canyon, where the night air bit cold for the first time since she had arrived, and looked out at the stars that blazed with a clarity she had never seen in the cities Caleb had taken her to. She thought of her mother again, the way she had paused that night when Anaiah had asked about her grandmother, the way her eyes had flipped toward the west before answering, as if remembering something forbidden. Anaiah closed her eyes and let the fragments of memory wash over her, the old songs her mother hummed when she thought no one was listening, songs that did not belong to the church but to something older. The locket pressed into her palm before she left. Her mother's words, "You carry more than just your name. You carry our silence." Those words rang now with new meaning, sharper than ever. Her fingers went to the locket at her throat, feeling its ridges. She had never opened it. Caleb had told her not to bring anything sentimental, but she had disobeyed him once, slipping it under her dress as a final rebellion. She unclasped it now, and for the first time in years, she looked inside. A tiny, faded photograph stared back two young women standing in front of a low adobe house, arms linked. One of them was unmistakably her mother, younger, hair loose, smile bright. The other woman had Teva's eyes. And around the edge of the photo, scrawled in a language Anaiah didn't know, were words that curved like the petroglyphs she had seen etched into the canyon walls. Her hands trembled. Her breath came shallow. She looked again, harder. The other woman was not just someone who looked like Teva, she was Teva's grandmother. She had to be. The resemblance was too exact, the slope of the cheekbones, the way the jaw set in a quiet strength. Anaiah's heart raced. She understood now, in a flash that knocked the wind out of her, what her mother had tried to protect her from, what Caleb had perhaps known and used. She was not an outsider. She was blood. Half of her, her mother's half, belonged to these people, to this land. She was not just a messenger sent to demand their surrender. She was a living thread tying two worlds together, a thread Caleb had planned to pull until the whole fabric unraveled. She dropped to her knees, clutching the locket, her stomach twisting. The betrayal was larger than Caleb's schemes. It was her own life, built on omissions, on silences inherited from a woman who had fled west to east with a story she never told. She thought of Teva's question again. Did God send you to us? It was no longer rhetorical. It was ancestral. She was the bridge, not because of Caleb's orders, but because of who she was. The realization burned through her exhaustion like a flare. She stood, locket still open in her palm, and turned back toward the sleeping camp. She couldn't leave now, not with this truth. Not with her blood tied to theirs. Not with her mother's silence still echoing in her ears. She walked back toward the fire pit and sat down, staring at the dying flames. The older woman, the one who had held the herbs on Anaiah's first day, sat across from her in the shadows, awake, watching. "You know now," she said quietly. Anaiah's head snapped up. "Know what?" The woman tilted her head. "Who you are." Anaiah's throat tightened. "Did my mother?" The woman nodded slowly. "She was born here. In the canyon. She left when the soldiers came the first time. She left because she thought it would save you." Tears blurred Anaiah's vision. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because telling you would endanger you," the woman said simply. "Because she wanted you to grow in peace, even if it meant growing in ignorance. Because she hoped the world outside would be kind. It wasn't." Anaiah pressed the locket against her lips, the metal cool, grounding. "Caleb used me," she whispered. "He sent me here as a weapon. But I'm not," she broke off, unable to finish. The woman leaned forward. "Blood remembers," she said. "Even when names are lost. That's why you burned the letter." Anaiah nodded, her tears spilling freely now. "I can't undo what I've done," she said. "I brought danger to your door. I thought I was helping my family, but I've hurt yours." "Families are not separate," the woman said. "They are branches of the same tree. Yours bent east. Ours stayed west. But the roots are the same." The words hit Anaiah like a blessing and a burden all at once. She wanted to speak, but before she could, a low sound rose from the canyon floor, the distant thrum of boots against sand, of men moving under cover of darkness. She stiffened. The woman's eyes narrowed. "They're coming," she said. "The ones who sent you. They won't wait until morning." Anaiah's heart pounded. "We have to warn everyone," she said, rising. The woman stood too. "We already have. We've been preparing for this." Anaiah shook her head, panic rising. "They'll kill you. They'll take the water. We've survived before," the woman said. "We'll survive again. But you must decide which side of the fire you stand on." Anaiah froze. The question hung in the air heavier than the desert heat. Would she remain the bride Caleb had shaped, the obedient messenger? Or would she claim her blood, her truth, and stand with the people who should have been hers from the beginning? She looked at Tiva, still asleep, unaware of the danger inching closer. She thought of her mother, of the silence she had carried. And she knew. She walked to the edge of the canyon, staring out at the dark shapes moving in the distance, her fists clenched. She would not be a weapon. She would not be a shield for men who broke wells and wore crosses. She would be what her mother could not, a voice. She turned back to the woman. "Tell me what to do," she said. The woman's expression softened, just slightly. "You've already begun," she said. "You came back." And with that, Anaiah felt something inside her shift, a tether snapping, a weight falling away. She was not lost. She was returning. She knelt beside Tiva, brushing a hand across her braid. The child stirred, blinking up at her. "What's wrong?" Tiva whispered. Anaiah met her gaze, eyes burning. "I think," she said, voice steady now, "God didn't send me to you. Blood did." The girl tilted her head, half asleep, and murmured, "Same thing," before curling back into her mother's arms. Anaiah rose again, looking out at the horizon where the first hint of dawn glimmered pale blue against the black. And for the first time since stepping into the desert, she felt not just despair, but resolve, a resolve woven from silence and story, from loss and belonging, from the realization that she was no longer a bride cast into exile, but a woman standing on her own soil, preparing to defend it. In that moment, she understood that the twist of her story was not a trap, but a revelation. She had been carrying not just a letter, but a lineage. Not just a mission, but a reckoning. And now, as the shadows of approaching men lengthened against the dunes, Anaiah squared her shoulders and whispered into the wind, as if her mother could still hear her, "I'm home." When morning finally broke over the canyon, it did not bring the warmth of a new day, but the brittle tension of war, not the kind with flags and banners, but the silent kind, where eyes meet across a plain of memory and blood. And everyone already knows what must be done even before a single word is spoken. Anaiah stood at the edge of the camp with her sleeves rolled up, her fingers still dusty from hours spent reinforcing the stone barricades the elders had shown her how to patch. All around her, the small hidden world she had grown to see as sacred now buzzed with quiet urgency. Children were ushered to crevices deeper in the rock. Water jars were sealed and tucked into woven baskets. Voices spoke only in hushed tones. Tiva's mother moved like a hawk, quick, sharp-eyed, issuing orders without panic, her movements elegant with the discipline of someone who had survived long enough to know that panic was a privilege. Anaiah watched them all, absorbing everything, how they worked in rhythm without instruction, how their silence was not fear but trust, a language born in exile. But inside her chest, another storm brewed. She was still split in two, the woman shaped by Caleb's power and the woman awakened by truth, by blood, by the revelation that her own mother had not merely sent her into the desert for redemption, but perhaps for reclamation. She had burned the letter, yes, but the memory of it still clung to her like ash. And with it came the guilt that no amount of good intention could cleanse. She had been the vehicle, the spy without knowing, the key Caleb had fashioned to fit a lock that guarded people he wanted to break. Now that lock was her heart. And yet what could she do? She had no weapons, no leadership, no plan. She only had her voice, her presence, and a face that now stood between two worlds, one she had tried to belong to, and one she had unknowingly abandoned. Tiva approached her at midday with a bowl of cracked corn and beans, sat beside her, and said nothing for a while. Then softly, "Mama says you're brave." Anaiah looked down, stirring the food slowly. "I'm not. I just know how it feels to be lied to." Tiva nodded solemnly. That's how she knew. Brave people don't always fight. They just stop lying." Anaiah smiled faintly. The child spoke like her mother, gentle but precise. "What happens if they come?" Anaiah asked. "Will you run?" Tiva shook her head. "No, we don't run anymore." The words landed like a drumbeat. "We don't run anymore." Anaiah realized then that this wasn't just about protecting land, it was about dignity, about finally standing and saying, "We will not be erased again." That evening, a scout returned with news. 3 men on horseback, 1 in a truck, had been spotted miles out, circling like vultures, setting markers. The elders gathered around a fire pit without flame, their faces drawn in hard lines. "They're looking for her," one said, nodding toward Anaiah. "They think she's still on their side." Anaiah stepped forward. "Then let them think it. Let me walk out there. I'll bring them here, but not how they expect." Murmurs rippled. "Too dangerous," said the old herbalist. "They'll shoot you. Or worse, use you again." "They already did," Anaiah replied. "But I'm not theirs anymore. Let me draw them into the place we choose, not theirs." After much silence, the eldest among them, an old man with eyes like river stone, nodded. "She's the bridge," he said. "She must decide where her weight falls." At dawn, Anaiah walked alone beyond the canyon's mouth. Dressed again in white, not the pristine wedding gown, but a linen tunic gifted by the women. Its color symbolic not of innocence, but of surrendering the past. She walked with hands open, palms out, and saw them waiting at the edge of the bluff, Caleb among them, dressed sharp, his boots polished, his expression unreadable. He stepped forward. "Anaiah," he said with a smile that once might have soothed her, but now made her ill. "You made it." She nodded. "I burned your letter." His smile faltered. "That was foolish." "So was trusting you," she said. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "We've invested in this, Anaiah. We've invested in you. Your family is safe because of it. Don't throw that away." She stepped closer, just within earshot. "They're not safe. They're silent. Like I was. But not anymore." Behind her, the canyon loomed a gaping mouth of stone in memory. "You think these people can protect you?" Caleb sneered. "You think your blood gives you power?" Anaiah smiled now, bitter but true. "I think it gives me belonging. Something you'll never understand." Caleb stepped forward, grabbing her wrist. "You think you get to decide which side you're on? Your property, Anaiah. You were bought and promised." Her free hand shot up, hard across his face. The slap echoed. Caleb reeled, stunned. "I was never yours," she said, voice like steel wrapped in silk. From the canyon, a whistle sounded a sharp, high note. Anaiah smiled. "You should go," she said, "before the land reminds you who it belongs to." Caleb looked beyond her, toward the rocks, toward the shadowed paths where figures began to appear silent. Steady, armed not with rifles but with presence, with history, with knowledge of every curve of the canyon. Caleb spat at the ground. "This isn't over." "It is for me," Anaiah said. "And soon it will be for you." He turned, barking orders to his men, and retreated. Anaiah stood until the dust from their boots settled, until the echoes of their fear dissolved into the stillness. When she turned back, the people were waiting. No one cheered. No one clapped. They only nodded, solemn and proud. She had chosen. She was no longer a messenger. She was part of the message. That night, Anaiah knelt beside Tiva's mother and asked, "What can I do now?" The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've already done it. You crossed the bridge." And in that moment, Anaiah finally understood. She had never been driven into the desert. She had been called home by a silence strong enough to outlast betrayal, by a child's voice brave enough to ask the one question that mattered. And the only answer she had left to give was her life, her truth, and the vow she now made not to Caleb, not to safety, but to legacy. The desert had always whispered warnings. But on the third day after Caleb's retreat, it began to roar not with words or war cries, but with wind and fire, as if the land itself had sensed the coming violence and chosen to answer in its own ancient tongue. The sky turned the color of rust before sunrise, and a hot wind blew in from the south, dry and bitter, carrying with it the scent of scorched mesquite and the low moan of something vast and angry moving toward them. Anaiah stood at the edge of the canyon with the elders, the earth beneath her bare feet vibrating faintly like a drum hidden beneath sand. "It's the wind season," one whispered. "But this is no ordinary storm." The birds had fled at first light, darting low across the ravines in eerie silence, and even the coyotes had not howled. The animals knew. Something was coming bigger than Caleb, more ancient than guns, a test not just of flesh, but of spirit. As the wind picked up, turning grit into spears and breath into a prayer, the people began to prepare not with panic, but with reverence. Water jars were sealed tight and lowered into underground pits. Blankets were soaked and draped over entrances. Children were painted with protective symbols drawn from memory, not books. Anaiah helped where she could, her arms moving without instruction, her body now known to them not as stranger or threat, but as kin. And yet, as the first real wave of the storm hit, slamming against the canyon walls with a scream that made the rocks groan, Anaiah felt the grip of fear tighten around her ribs like a vice. She had never seen a sandstorm like this, not even during the nights Caleb had dragged her across arid highways, sleeping in half-built compounds guarded by men who pretended to be righteous. This was not weather. This was a reckoning. The wind twisted down into the canyon like a serpent, howling, flinging stones like insults. And suddenly visibility dropped to nothing, just red dust and screaming air and the choking, bitter taste of the earth itself turned against them. Anaiah was shoved back against the rock, shielding Tiva with her body, the child clinging tightly, both of them wrapped in the soaked blankets that smelled of cedar and smoke. All around them, people moved like ghosts tied together with long cords of woven hemp to avoid being lost in the storm, their faces wrapped, their eyes burning. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes stretched thin by adrenaline. The wind did not relent. It punished. It scraped at skin, howled into lungs, scoured thoughts. And somewhere, beneath the storm's roar, Anaiah swore she could still hear Caleb's voice echoing in her mind, soft, manipulative, promising safety if only she stayed obedient, if only she let herself be used. But now that voice sounded small, distant, irrelevant. Because here now she was choosing pain over passivity, truth over survival. She was choosing to stay. The storm raged into the night, and when it finally began to fade, leaving a silence so complete it rang in her ears, Anaiah crawled out from beneath the shelter to find the camp transformed, tents flattened, ash scattered, but no one missing. The people emerged like the land battered but unbroken. They rebuilt in silence. Children began to sweep dust into patterns again. The fire pits were cleared. Anaiah moved slowly, her muscles aching, every breath raw, but her mind alight with something she hadn't known she'd been missing, purpose. But the trial wasn't over. That evening, a scout returned not from the canyon, but from the flatlands beyond. "They're coming again," he said, his voice low. 5 trucks. More men. They say they're coming for the woman in white. And the water beneath the ridge. Anaiah closed her eyes. The firestorm had not delayed them. It had driven them into desperation. "They'll try to wait until night," said one of the elders. "When the air cools. They think we're afraid of darkness." "We're not," Tiva said, stepping forward, face smudged but fierce. Anaiah looked at her and felt the surge of something sacred. "Then we meet them in the dark," she said. "But not with violence." Murmurs followed. "If we don't fight, they expect us to fight," Anaiah interrupted. "They expect us to run or resist or beg. We will not. We will outlast them." And so, under moonlight fractured by dust, the people prepared not for a battle, but for endurance. They sealed every entrance, doused fires, vanished into stone and silence. When Caleb's men arrived, yelling into the wind, rifles raised, headlights cutting through the gloom, they found nothing but dust and stone. "They fled," one said. "No," Caleb murmured. "They're here, watching." They fired into shadows, shouted, tore down stone markers. But the land did not give them names or faces. Only wind, only silence. And then one voice. Anaiah's, standing atop a ridge, lit only by the red eye of a dying moon. "We're not yours," she said. Her voice carried, steady. "Not the land. Not the water. Not the blood in our veins." "Anaiah," Caleb said, voice taut. "Come down. This isn't you." "You're right," she replied. It never was. Behind her, the people began to emerge, not as an army, but as a tide slow, deliberate, unarmed. Just eyes and presence and memory. Caleb stepped back. "What is this?" He hissed. "This," Anaiah said, stepping down slowly, "is the fire you started. But it won't burn us. It will burn you." He raised a hand to signal his men. But no one moved. Because now, even his own began to see men trained to fear resistance, not resilience. To expect violence, not unity. Anaiah walked forward until she stood inches from him. "This land remembers," she said. "And so do we. Go home." Caleb stared at her, his weapon lowered, his mouth tight, and for the first time, Anaiah saw fear in his eyes. Not of her, but of what she represented. He turned, gave the signal, and they left slowly, unwillingly, swallowed by the dust they had stirred. Anaiah stood until the last truck vanished. Behind her, Tiva slipped her hand into Anaiah's. "You didn't run," she said. Anaiah looked down at her. "Neither did you." And as the sun rose, pale and gold, cutting through the last of the haze, Anaiah knew that she had crossed the threshold, not just of place, but of self. She was not a bride. She was not a messenger. She was fire-touched, storm-tested, a bridge reforged by truth. And in that moment, beneath the red sky, she was finally home not as visitor or outsider, but as one who had survived the trial and found not just belonging, but legacy in its ashes. In the hush that followed the storm and the standoff, the canyon breathed again, not in relief but in recognition, as if the land itself had been watching and waiting for Anaiah to choose, to stay, to listen, and now that she had, it would open its ancient mouth and begin to speak. The silence in the days that followed was not absence, but presence, a heavy, holy quiet that settled into the corners of her heart and uncurled the tension in her spine. The kind of stillness that does not erase grief, but gives it a place to sit. The people returned to their rhythms slowly, as one does after a funeral or a birth, mindfully, gratefully, but never as before. Anaiah helped repair the woven roof coverings that the storm had shredded, knelt beside elders to sweep the grit from sacred alcoves, and accepted without resistance the smudges of ochre painted on her arms when she was invited to the inner circle for the evening stories. It began not with words, but with the lighting of a small fire within a hollowed-out rock that had blackened from generations of smoke. No one clapped. No one declared it had begun. It simply began. The elders sat in a half-moon, children at their feet, younger adults behind them, Anaiah to the side, uncertain if she belonged, until Tiva patted the earth beside her and whispered, "Sit here. That's where my aunt used to sit." Anaiah sat, knees drawn up, hands folded, heart open. The fire cracked once, and then the oldest woman, her skin folded and furrowed like the very canyon walls, began to speak in a low, Rhythmic cadence, her voice not loud but undeniable. The words she used were not English nor Spanish, but the older language, the one Anaiah had only ever heard in her mother's humming, the one that tasted like river stone and wind. She couldn't understand every word, but she didn't need to. The cadence carried meaning, and the pauses carried more. The story was of the beginning, not a Genesis like the Bible, but a becoming, a rising. It spoke of a time before time, when the land was soft and walked on by spirits who breathed fire into clay and carved laughter into rivers. The people had not come from anywhere. They had always been here. The desert had not been empty. It had been awake. Then came the forgetters, the cutters of trees and drawers of maps, and the people learned to move like shadows, to carry memory in their hands like embers. The story went on for hours, drifting through lifetimes, naming names Anaiah didn't know but somehow recognized like muscle memory, like blood knowledge. She leaned in, eyes wide, breath shallow, and at some point, the old woman turned her gaze to Anaiah, just briefly, and said a word that made the entire circle still. Anaiah didn't know the meaning, but she felt it in her gut, like a bell struck behind her ribs. Later, Tiva told her it meant returner. For the next several nights, the stories continued. Some were sung. Some acted out by children. Some whispered only to the fire, as if it alone could be trusted. Anaiah began to understand that memory here was not linear, not a list of dates and names, but a woven thing, a tapestry where past and present touched at the edges, folding over each other like prayer hands. One elder told a story of a woman who crossed the desert barefoot with a stolen child in her arms, chased by soldiers, guided only by the stars. Another spoke of a boy who drowned in a spring because he refused to leave when the white trucks came. Another, still, of a dream that passed from grandmother to granddaughter for 7 generations, always ending with the same question: did God send you to us? That night, Anaiah lay awake staring at the stars, realizing the child's question was not new. It was a thread passed down, like the songs, like the pain. And now, somehow, it had found its way to her lips and hers to answer. The canyon, too, began to open. Not physically, but spiritually. Tiva took her to hidden places, a cliff marked with handprints that shimmered red in the morning light. A spring that trickled year-round beneath a rock shaped like a turtle's shell. A tree whose bark peeled in scrolls, used by the grandmothers to record events when writing was banned. At each place, Anaiah touched the stone, the water, the bark, and felt something shift inside her. Not dramatically, but undeniably. The elders gave her a name in their tongue, not to replace her given one, but to root it. It meant, she who walked away and walked back. Anaiah wept when they said it. Not loud but deep. Because for the first time, someone saw not just what she had done wrong, but what she was trying to do right. She carved that name into a piece of driftwood and set it above the door of the shelter she now slept in. It wasn't just her place of rest, it was her covenant. As days passed, she began to learn the old songs, not all the words, but the melodies. She sang them under her breath while she helped the women grind corn, while she washed linens at the spring, while she braided Tuva's hair in the mornings. Her hands began to remember things they'd never done before, movements passed down through bone, not instruction. Her mother's silence had not been an abandonment. It had been a seed. And now in the dust and dusk of this canyon, it was blooming. But even in peace, the past echoed. Some nights, she dreamed of Caleb not as he was, but as a voice that tried to pull her back into the role of the obedient bride, the peacekeeper pawn. She'd wake with sweat down her back, heart racing, until the sound of the desert calmed her, the rhythmic chirping, the rustle of a bird's wing, the whisper of wind across stone. She no longer feared silence. She had learned that silence was not always surrender. Sometimes it was ceremony. Sometimes it was strength. One morning, she sat with the old woman by the fire, holding a stone warmed by coals. "Do you believe in redemption?" Anaiah asked. The woman nodded slowly. But not the way the preachers say it. Not a wiping clean. A weaving in. You carry your wrongs like thread, but you weave them into something new. Anaiah looked at her hands, calloused now, dirt beneath her nails. What if I never belong? The woman smiled, eyes crinkling like parchment. Child, belonging isn't something you find. It's something you build. One stone at a time. And so Anaiah built, quietly, steadily, without expectation. She became a voice in their morning songs, a hand in their evening fires, a listener of their stories, and one day, a teller. When a child scraped her knee, Anaiah was the one who wrapped it. When the spring ran low, she helped dig the trough deeper. When the stars fell one night in a sudden cascade, she held Tiva tight and whispered, "We're part of this too." She no longer wondered if she had been sent. She knew she had returned. And in doing so, she had awakened something not just in the canyon, but in herself. The echoes she once feared had become her guides. And every whisper she now heard in the wind carried a single message: you are not lost. You are remembered. And that was enough. It began with a sound she had almost forgotten: rubber tires crunching over dry gravel, slow and deliberate, like a warning peeling across the morning silence. And when Anaiah looked up from the bowl she was washing in the stream, her heart stuttered because the sound didn't belong here anymore. Not in this space of slow healing and quiet belonging, and yet there it was, unmistakable. She froze, her hands submerged in the cold water, and felt her breath catch in her throat as a young boy, one of the lookouts from the canyon's far edge, came running. Barefoot and breathless, his chest heaving, words tumbling out faster than his mouth could shape them. "It's a man alone," he gasped. "He says he's looking for Anaiah. He says he's not like the others." For a brief moment, the world slowed, the sounds faded, and Anaiah felt the unmistakable shiver of past and present, crashing into each other like waves against canyon stone. She stood slowly, drying her hands on her tunic, and made her way toward the canyon entrance where a small group had already gathered. Their expressions wary, guarded, not fearful, but sharpened by experience. Tiva clung to her mother's side, eyes wide, her small fingers wrapped tight around a length of cloth. Anaiah reached the rise and saw him then, a man not dressed like Caleb's foot soldiers. No gun, no badge, just worn jeans, boots stained red with dust, and a face that carried both familiarity and dread because she knew him. Knew him in the way old wounds remember the blade. His name was Elijah, her older cousin, her mother's nephew, the boy who used to sneak her pomegranates when her father wasn't looking, the man who had disappeared into Caleb's world years ago and never returned. He looked thinner now, sun-darkened, eyes older than his age. But when his gaze landed on Anaiah, something inside her cracked. "You," she said, barely above a whisper. "You were supposed to be gone." Elijah raised his hands, palms open. "I had to come," he said. "I have something to tell you." The elders exchanged glances. One stepped forward. "If he's family, you may speak to him, but not alone." Anaiah nodded, and they led Elijah to the outer circle near the fire pit. He sat on the stone bench with the stiffness of a man who knew he was not welcome. Anaiah remained standing. "Talk," she said. Elijah's voice was low, choked with dust and guilt. "I didn't know not all of it. I swear to you, Anaiah, I didn't know Caleb's full plan. I thought we were securing water rights. I thought we were saving the land from developers. He told us we were helping." Anaiah felt her jaw tighten. "Helping? By manipulating me? By using me as bait?" "It wasn't supposed to be like that," he said quickly. "He said the people here had no claim, that the title was expired, that if someone from your family, my family—" She snapped. "You mean the part of me none of you acknowledged until it was convenient?" Elijah flinched. Anaiah, I left because I believed in what he said. Because I thought if I stayed close to him, I could keep you safe. Safe from what? She asked, voice rising. From the truth? From my own blood? The circle around them held its breath. Even the wind seemed to still. Elijah dropped his gaze. He's coming back, he said. One final time. Not with guns. With lawyers. With claims. Anaiah's heart pounded. What claims? That your presence here was a conflict of interest. That the letter burned or not was a contract. That this land is now under federal review. Her knees went weak. She staggered back a step. Tiva reached out instinctively, catching her hand. I came to warn you, Elijah said. Not to defend him. I left him. I walked away. But they know. They know who you are now. They're using your bloodline against you. The betrayal, though old, burned fresh. Caleb had not needed guns. He'd needed her name, her ancestry, her signature. Anaiah turned away, breathing hard, the canyon swimming around her. All the peace she'd built, all the belonging now tainted, questioned, undermined. She walked to the edge of the fire pit and stood in silence, trying to swallow the grief that was rising like floodwater in her chest. One of the elders stepped forward. What he says may be true, she said softly. But truth does not undo truth. You were not sent to harm us. You stayed. That is what matters. But Anaiah shook her head. If my name is used to take this land, then my staying was the very blade that cuts you. Then, said another elder, perhaps it is time you become the shield. Anaiah looked at them, all weathered faces, kind eyes, scarred hands. These were not people who needed saving. They needed solidarity. What can I do? She asked. Elijah stood. There's one option, he said. If you testify, if you publicly declare that Caleb's contract was fraudulent, that you were misled, it might not stop the lawyers. But it changes the ground they stand on. Anaiah's breath caught. Publicly? Yes, he nodded. In court. In papers. Your name out in the open. That puts the tribe at risk, someone said. Elijah nodded. But it also puts light where there's been darkness. The conversation stretched like wire across an open chasm. The elders conferred. Some nodded. Others hesitated. Tiva's mother stepped forward. If you choose this, she said, you cannot return to silence. Not ever again. Anaiah closed her eyes. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. You carry our silence. She opened her eyes. Then I'll carry our sound too, she said. Even if it shakes the ground. That night, as the canyon slept, Anaiah sat by the fire with Tiva. The child looked at her, blinking slowly. You're going to leave again, aren't you? Anaiah nodded. For a while. To speak where people don't want to listen. Tiva looked down. Will they believe you? I don't know, Anaiah whispered. But I'll speak anyway. The next morning, she braided her hair in the style her mother once wore, wrapped her locket in cloth, and walked out of the canyon not as a runaway, not as a castaway, but as a witness. Behind her, the canyon walls held her echo. Ahead of her, the world waited to hear a story it had long tried to bury. She would tell it all: the betrayal, the bloodline, the burning of a letter meant to erase lives. She would speak for the child who lost her brother, for the women who kept songs in their bones, for her mother who never got to say it out loud. And if the world still turned away, so be it. Anaiah had already chosen her side. The rupture had revealed more than betrayal. It had revealed purpose. And she would walk into the storm, this time not as a bride cast out, but as the truth returning home. Anaiah walked into the courthouse like a woman both hunted and chosen, her footsteps echoing through the marble halls as if the very ground beneath her were trying to remember her story before she could speak it. And with every breath she took, She felt the weight of history pressing down on her collarbones, her mother's silence, her own complicity, the songs of a tribe that had learned to whisper even when screaming was deserved. The building itself was cold, indifferent, built of stone meant to look eternal, but vibrating faintly with the tension of old injustice. Men in suits paced the corridors, their gazes brief but sharp, scanning her with the practiced disinterest of those who measure lives in spreadsheets and verdicts. Her palms were damp. Her locket hung beneath her tunic like an anchor. And in her chest, her heart thundered not from fear of the moment, but from the fear of what might come after, when the truth was out and the world responded with either cruelty or change. Inside the courtroom, she saw them Caleb seated at the long polished table, his expression unreadable, flanked by men who had once promised her family salvation and instead delivered silence. And beside them, folders thick with documents. Satellite maps, forged signatures, photographs taken without consent. Her testimony would not erase those things. It would not magically reclaim what was being stolen, but it would pierce the performance. She took her seat, facing the judge, and when her name was called and she rose to speak, she did not raise her voice, she let it fall, steady and low, like desert rain that does not announce itself, but transforms everything it touches. "My name is Anaiah," she began, "and for most of my life, I didn't know who I was not truly. I wore a name I didn't understand and obeyed people who didn't understand me. I believed that loyalty meant silence. I believed that survival meant obedience. But I was wrong." Her hands gripped the edge of the stand. "I was sent to the desert under the belief that I was part of a mission of peace. I was given a letter sealed with promises I was told not to question. I delivered that letter to a people whose blood runs through my veins, whose songs are stitched into my ancestry, and I was meant to do so quietly, blindly. I burned that letter, not because I wanted to defy authority, but because the authority I was raised to trust had become the thief." The room remained still, but she could feel the cracks beginning to form. The shift in posture, the narrowing of eyes. "The land in question," she continued, "is not empty. It is not silent. It holds graves, songs, stories, and names, some of which are mine. My mother never told me the full truth of where we came from, and I don't blame her. She lived in a world that punished identity. She kept me alive by teaching me to forget. But forgetting is not peace. It is erasure." She looked toward Caleb now. "The men who trained me, who claimed to protect me, did so not out of love or principle, but because they saw value in what I represented: a bridge, a symbol, something useful. And when I stopped being useful, they turned." Caleb's face hardened, his jaw twitching. "My presence here is not just about land rights," Anaiah said. "It's about the right to return, the right to belong, the right to say, I know where I come from, and I will not let it be stripped away for profit, for policy, or for anyone's convenience." Her voice wavered only once when she said, "I was a bride once, but not in the way people imagine. I was married to a lie, and today I divorce it." The silence that followed was not empty, it was dense with reverence. The judge nodded solemnly, and the lawyers scribbled. Caleb said nothing. He couldn't. There were no weapons left in his arsenal that hadn't already been exposed. After her testimony, Anaiah stepped outside, her legs shaking beneath her, the air thick with exhaust and noise, a jarring contrast to the canyon's sacred quiet. But in her mind, she could still hear it: the rustle of leaves, the soft footfalls of Tiva running through sand, the way the wind spoke like a mother who had not forgotten her name. News traveled fast. By evening, the tribe knew what she had done. Tiva's mother sent a message through one of the few elders with a satellite phone: "We heard you, and we are still here." It was enough. Anaiah stayed in the city long enough to attend the hearings, to sign the affidavits, to meet with the advocates who began to see her not just as a witness, but as a weapon of truth. She found her voice rippling outward, quoted in articles, cited in filings, whispered in communities that had long been waiting for someone to stand up and say what others were too afraid to confess. But the more she spoke, the more she longed to return, not because she was tired, but because she understood now that her power came not from the microphone, but from the canyon, from the place that had first given her silence, then story. When she returned weeks later, the legal fight still unresolved, but shaking the people met her, not with fanfare, but with a shared breath of welcome. Tiva ran to her, arms flung wide, her laughter brighter than the morning sun. Anaiah knelt and embraced her, pressing her cheek to the child's forehead. "I kept my promise," she whispered. Tiva nodded. "I know. We watched the stars. They told us." That night, around the fire, Anaiah was asked to speak again, not to the world, but to the people. She didn't stand. She sat cross-legged as they did and simply said, "I used to think mercy was weakness, that to forgive was to forget. But I've learned that mercy is the only thing stronger than ruin. Because ruin ends things. Mercy begins them again." An elder passed her a stone marked with an old symbol, the same shape Anaiah had seen in her locket photo, carved on the cliff wall near the spring. It meant, root returned to root. She placed it beside her in the earth, as if it were a vow. The legal battle would rage on. The land would be debated in courtrooms by men who'd never stepped foot on its soil. But the deeper victory had already been won. Anaiah had chosen mercy not just toward the tribe, but toward herself. She had allowed the truth to rise, even when it scorched her pride. She had stepped out of the role assigned to her and into the name buried beneath generations of silence. And in doing so, she had rewritten her legacy. She was no longer the virgin bride cast into the desert. She was the woman who returned to reclaim what could not be bought. The woman who learned that sometimes mercy is the sharpest blade. And in the quiet that followed, as the fire burned low and the stars resumed their eternal watch, Anaiah finally rested not in exile, not in shame, but in belonging. The desert had always been a place where things disappeared: water, footprints, stories. But as Anaiah stood beneath the wide expanse of blazing sky weeks after her return, she realized it was also where things endured, stubborn and sacred, outlasting the hands that tried to erase them. And in that truth, she found both pain and peace. The legal fight over the canyon land had turned into something larger than any of them. Expected a case now wrapped in federal appeals, dissected in newsrooms, whispered about by politicians and preservationists alike. But out here, far from the headlines and hearings, Anaiah saw what mattered more. The people hadn't left. They hadn't fled. They hadn't fractured. In fact, they had begun to build again, not fast or loud, but with care, like planting seeds in ground scorched by fire. The elders spoke more often now, not out of urgency but legacy, their stories deeper and more deliberate, their hands guiding younger ones through ceremonies Anaiah had once only glimpsed from the edge. And among those youth, Anaiah had become something strange, neither leader nor guest, neither blood stranger nor elder voice, but a living reminder that loss could become legacy if it passed through truth. Her days were quiet but full, weaving mats from reeds with Tiva's mother, teaching the children the old songs she was still learning herself, hiking into the cliffs with the herbalist to gather leaves that only bloomed after windstorms. Each task was a kind of vow, a piece of her inheritance earned not by birthright, but by return. Yet peace had not come without cost. Caleb never returned, not physically, but his shadow lingered in paperwork, in letters marked urgent, in the cold calls from officials Anaiah now managed on behalf of the people, acting as a bridge once more, but this time of her choosing. She stayed in contact with lawyers from afar, offering statements, preparing testimony, standing firm in the quiet power she'd found. And she felt the toll of it. Some nights she awoke breathless, dreaming of courtrooms filled with smoke, of voices calling her name with unfamiliar mouths. But in the morning, she would rise, walk barefoot to the ridge above the canyon, and listen to the wind until it slowed her heart. Tiva came with her most mornings now, carrying the small stone pouch she insisted on collecting herself, filled with petals, seeds, and tiny bones. "In case we need to start again," she'd say, solemn. Anaiah would smile, ruffle her hair, and say, "We already are." Yet the deepest wound came not from the outside world, but from within. One night, under a sky thick with stars, the oldest elder took Anaiah's hand and placed a bundle wrapped in elk hide into her lap. "This is your mother's," she said. "She left it with us before she fled." Anaiah's hands shook as she unwrapped it, a thin, tattered cloth embroidered with symbols she now recognized, not just decorative, but declarative. A map, a lineage. The markings told the story of her family's split, their departure from the canyon decades ago, the silence that followed, the hidden names. At the center, stitched in faded blue, was a circle split in two halves. One side held a small red flame. The other, a single drop of water. "Fire and water," the elder said. "Your mother was both. So are you." Anaiah pressed the cloth to her chest and wept, not for what had been lost, but for what had been buried and now returned. She wrote letters to her mother, long ones, folded into the crevices of the canyon wall, knowing she might never send them, but needing to say the words, "You did not fail me. You gave me the path." As the seasons began to shift subtly, as they do in the desert, the land offered its own memory. Wildflowers bloomed after a light rain. A new nest appeared in the cliff edge near the spring. And one morning, Anaiah found a single white feather placed at the threshold of her shelter. No one claimed it. No one explained. But she understood. It was the land's acknowledgement, the desert's nod. And though it would never be easy, though the struggle for ownership, for recognition, for protection would press on, Anaiah had done something irreversible. She had made forgetting impossible. Her story had woven itself into the larger one, the collective one. Children asked about her now during storytelling circles. Elders mentioned her name beside her mother's, and that pairing, Anaiah, daughter of Isabel, was now said not with shame, but with honor. One evening, as the sky poured itself into the horizon in a blaze of red and orange, Tiva tugged at Anaiah's sleeve. "Tell me again," she said, "what it felt like when you burned the letter." Anaiah smiled softly, looking into the fire. "It felt like losing everything. And finding myself. And when you stood in the courtroom?" the child asked. Anaiah thought for a moment, then said, "It felt like my voice was older than me. Like it didn't come from my mouth, but from every woman before me who never got to speak." Tiva nodded as if she understood. And perhaps she did. Children raised in exile often understand things beyond their years. Later that night, Anaiah stood alone under the stars and whispered a prayer, not one learned from books or churches, but one built from memory, pain, and peace. "Let my name be a root," she whispered. "Let my silence become stone. Let my story become water flowing, remembered, unbroken." And the wind answered not in words, but in the soft rustle of canyon brush, the flap of an owl's wings, the hush of fire settling into embers. Anaiah did not know what the next month would bring, or the next season. But she knew this. She had not been sent to the desert to be forgotten. She had been called here to remember. And under the blazing sky, surrounded by those who had taught her to reclaim her place not with pride, but with purpose, she knew that her sacrifice had not been in vain. It had become legacy, not in monuments or money or political victories, but in seeds, in songs, in the whisper of a girl who would one day say, "She came back." And she stayed. In the gentle hush that followed weeks of wind and fire and reckonings, the desert finally exhaled not with thunder, but with morning. And Anaiah stood barefoot at the ridge's edge as the first light of dawn peeled back the dark like old paint. brushing gold against the canyon walls that had held her like a second womb. And in that moment, the past no longer felt like a weight, but like a witness. Something not to carry, but to walk beside. The dust had settled, not just in the literal sense, the storms having passed. The legal noise dimmed, but in her chest, in her blood. In the spaces where once there had been only guilt and confusion, and the echo of a name she hadn't known how to claim. Anaiah, daughter of Isabel. Voice of the forgotten. Bridge of blood. She inhaled, the wind cool now, soft with the scent of mesquite and ash and something floral rising from below a blooming she could not see, but knew was there, just beyond the ridge. Tiva was beside her, silent, watching the sky with the kind of stillness that children are rarely taught, but often inherit from people who've had to be still to survive. "Is it over now?" she asked softly, not with hope, but with the wariness of one who knows peace is always temporary. Anaiah considered the question. Down in the canyon, the community moved slowly, gently. The old woman who had once given her a name now walked with a cane, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Tiva's mother had begun teaching two of the younger girls how to skin rabbits in tan hides, passing on knowledge that had once almost vanished. A new spring had been found just north of the camp, thin, hesitant, but promising. And the lawyers hadn't called in over a week. "It's not over," Anaiah said. "But it's ours now." The girl nodded. That was enough. They descended the ridge and joined the morning fire where breakfast was being made: corn, wild greens, dried berries. No fanfare, no rituals. Just presence. A life rebuilt one bowl at a time. Anaiah had begun teaching, though she never called it that. She simply told stories. Some of them were her own, the version of the courthouse not recorded in court transcripts. The feeling of standing before men in suits with your grandmother's name burning on your tongue. Some were fragments of what her mother had whispered to her long ago, now stitched together with meaning and music. And some were gathered from the canyon itself, the stories she had absorbed without even realizing, through stone, fire, and silence. The people called these mornings the Covenant Circle, not because a contract had been written, but because something unspoken had been sealed. A new agreement. A new way. Anaiah had thought once that the covenant she was born into was one of obedience. That to keep peace meant to keep quiet. But now she knew better. This covenant was older, rougher, rooted in ash and bone and the soft thud of drums made from stretched hide. It required presence, not perfection. Truth, not performance. One evening, she asked Tiva, "What do you think the word covenant means?" The girl thought for a moment, kicking sand with her toe. "It means a promise no one can see, but everyone feels." And Anaiah smiled because there was no better way to say it. In time, the court ruled that the land was not subject to seizure, not because of title, but because of testimony. Anaiah's words, her legacy, had become legal precedent. But that victory was not what the people celebrated. What mattered more was what happened the day after the news arrived. A single elder stood at the mouth of the canyon and sang a song that hadn't been sung in 50 years. No one recorded it. No one asked for translation. They just listened. And Anaiah sat beside Tiva, tears on her cheeks, and whispered, "This is what it sounds like when something broken gets mended." The season turned. The heat softened. Rain came brief but sweet. A new structure was built near the spring, not a church, not a hall, but a place with open walls and a ceiling woven from reeds, where people could gather, rest, speak. They called it the returning place. Anaiah was asked to carve the sign. She used a stone blade and took her time, scratching each letter into the wood as if writing into her own skin. One day, she found a box at the entrance of her shelter, unmarked, dusty, sealed with wax. Inside, she found photographs, old letters, and a journal. Her mother's, sent by someone she would never know. The pages were faded, but the ink still held. She read them slowly over weeks, discovering the truth of Isabel, not as a myth, not as a victim, but as a girl who had run not to escape her people, but to protect them. A girl who had loved fiercely, fought quietly, and left behind a map not of geography, but of spirit. In the final page, her mother had written, "If you find this, it means you returned. And if you returned, it means the silence did not win." Anaiah folded the journal and placed it beside the stone the elders had once given her. Her covenant was complete not because it was over, but because it had begun again. Some nights, she and Tiva would walk the ridge beneath a sky split with stars, and the girl would ask questions about cities, about Caleb, about why people take what isn't theirs. Anaiah never gave perfect answers. Only stories. Only songs. One night, the girl asked, "Do you think God sent you to us?" Anaiah paused. Not because she didn't know, but because now, the question carried so much weight, it needed a moment to land. She looked at the child who had once asked that same question in the middle of a windstorm, when Anaiah was half-starved and half-lost, and trying to make sense of the ruin behind her. And now here they were whole, together, not healed entirely, but healing constantly. "No," Anaiah said softly. "I don't think God sent me." Tiva blinked, surprised. "Then who?" Anaiah smiled, pressing her hand to the earth. "The land. The blood. The silence. My mother's story. Your brother's memory. All of it. All of it pulled me back." The girl nodded slowly. "I like that answer better." Anaiah looked at her, this child who had once been a whisper in a storm and was now her compass, her echo, her kin. And she felt it something sacred, something final, and yet just beginning. A covenant, not of paper, but of memory. Not of law, but of love. And as the dawn stretched long fingers across the canyon floor, illuminating the dust that danced like spirits in the air, Anaiah whispered her final vow not aloud, but into the bones of the earth beneath her feet. "I will not leave again." Not in voice, not in presence, not in legacy. And the desert, in its quiet way, answered her with light.